Hello, everybody. Welcome to another live stream for the HVAC podcast. Today, Professor James E. Tabor joins us. So, Dr. Tabor, I see that you have a new book out recently. It's the Book of Genesis, a new translation for the Transparent English Bible. And as everybody knows, there's a lot of translations of the Bible out there, including the Book of Genesis. What is different about yours, and why did you work on this one?
Okay, good to see you, Jacob. I'm glad we're doing this together. It'll be very interesting, I think. Let me just read you an interesting quotation that I have in the introduction to the book. And it, in some ways, gives an answer to the question. There's an ancient adage, I think it's even rabbinic, that if you translate too literally, you violate the text. But if you translate too liberally, you violate the text. So there's quite a debate among translators of how literal should a translation be. That's usually the word used. I've chosen to use a different word. Like there are translations from way back. If you know Young's Concordance to the Bible, the gentleman who did that, Young, he has Young's literal translation. It's almost like reading an interlinear or something like that. But I prefer the word transparent. I have this sheet of Hebrew just as an illustration. This is the first page of Genesis. If you're not a Hebrew reader or a Hebrew speaker, it obviously is, as we say jokingly, Greek to you. But actually, this translation is supposed to allow you to peer through that Hebrew text, in this case into English, which is sort of the derivative language in this case, and yet see the Hebrew and even feel the Hebrew. So it has quite a few elements to it in terms of what makes it transparent, but that's the basic concept. Really, to explain that, we would need to give you all sorts of examples, and I think that's the best way to do it, rather than talk abstractly about the book. It's part of an ongoing effort to do certainly the Torah, possibly the entire Hebrew Bible, which is a lifetime work. So I need some extra years maybe to finish that. But I have a team of people that I work with. And I'm thinking even of doing some New Testament translating. I haven't decided whether to do that or not. But the concept would fit the Greek New Testament as well. Now, there are a few translations. If some people know Everett Fox or Robert Alter, I've got Alter behind me here. If you see this 3-box set, that's Robert Alter. And I would also say Friedman, Richard Elliott Friedman, who've tried to really give us, I'd rather use the word accurate rather than literal, accurate translations. So the question comes down to, what does that really mean? What does it mean to be transparent? What is it to be transparent? To be able to peer through the English, and if you don't know Hebrew, to see the Hebrew. So there's a couple things. One of the things is the very rhythm of the text, the way it feels when you read it. This particular translation has an odd feeling to it until you get used to it. You have to read it aloud in some ways to get the rhythm, but every ancient language has a rhythm. And what often happens in translation, other than poetry, where people try to keep this, is it gets lost and it's turned into an English thing. Well, I want to turn it into an English thing where you can read it, but I also want it to have the feel and the rhythm, almost like a percussion. You know, what is the rhythm of the percussion instrument? And I'll give you some examples of that. Also, I want it to be consistent. In Hebrew, you have often very basic vocabulary. This is a new book. This is not the book, it's just the cover, but Ross Nichols, my friend, who has also helped me with the translation. You can get this on Amazon. This is a list of the top, I believe it's 1,000 words, mastery of the Hebrew Bible. Let's see, learn the top 1,000 words. And if you learn the top 1,000 words of Hebrew, and that's what this little book is teaching you to do, starts with frequency, words used over 1,000, words used over 500. You get a lot of repetition in Hebrew, but what often happens in English is it sounds redundant, and to keep saying over and over, for example, when Jacob in the book of Genesis puts his head down on the stone, remember, for a pillow, and has his dream, it uses the term this place, this place, this place, this place. I think 4 or 5 times. We'd have to look. It doesn't matter the detail, but repeatedly. And that's not really good English style. There's an example early on in Genesis, I'll read it to you in a few minutes, where Adam first sees Eve when Eve's created from his side. And he goes, this one, this time, this one, using the feminine. And you almost get the idea that he's sort of just jabbering and very excited, this one, this one, this one. But again, often in English, you just kind of smooth it out. And so you want that rhythm. Also, non-theological. Now, I'm using theology to mean standard ways that things are translated. I don't want to be different just to be different, but I want to be accurate and somewhat literal. For example, there's a passage in Genesis where Jacob, the grandson of Abraham, is making a journey, and I think it's to Beersheba. It doesn't matter, but literally the Hebrew says, and Jacob lifted his feet and walked to Beersheba, let's say. Just don't remember the place for sure because I'm doing the verb. And you know what? Most English translations, 99% of them, and Jacob went to Beersheba. See the idea? But I like lifted his feet and walked. Rivers walk almost sounds like Native American talk in some ways. You know how you name in Native American tradition, boy who was born on the new moon when the leaves come falling down. And that's the guy's name, being very literal. To use a really silly example, it's not in the Bible, but people of my generation remember Tarzan movies. Remember that, me Tarzan, you Jane, when they're just learning each other's language. Now, what if I smooth that out and say, my given name by my parents was Tarzan, and I'm going to call you Jane. See how it's the same meaning. He's telling his name, Tarzan, and he's going, I'm going to call you Jane. But the rhythm of it, me Tarzan, you Jane. There's not an exact equivalent in the Hebrew Bible, but I think you get the idea. It's just a real pleasure to read. I mean, I don't care how many times you've read Genesis. If you pick this up, it'll be a new book in terms of meaning, interpretation, and not lots of theological terms like church and atonement and salvation and just a whole lot of terms that are just loaded up. They tend to be Christian terms, sometimes Jewish terms. So that's part of the idea. But I think the best way to illustrate it, because I just want to give a quick overview, is just to give you examples. So I'm going to take the new RSV, which is the translation most scholars prefer, and I'm going to read you a few verses here and there, skipping around, mostly from Genesis, because that's the translation of Genesis. The reason I say mostly is just about 3 weeks ago, I published this, Selections from the Hebrew Bible. Everybody was asking me, have you only done Genesis? And as you can see here, other selections for people who like this thing. It's almost like a sample, but you might want to read, for example, Isaiah 53 about the suffering servant. I've got it in here, and it reads just very, very different from the way people kind of memorize it in their heads. So here's Genesis 1:20. You ready? New RSV. Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the dome of the sky. Nothing wrong with that. I like it, actually. But here's the Transparent English Bible, my translation. Let the waters swarm a swarm of living life breathers, and let the flyer fly upon the land, upon the face of the expanse of the skies. So you see how that's different. It's different in artistic formulation and rhythm and poetic value. You swarm a swarm. So there's resonance between the noun and the verb. So why not put it in? Why would you say, let the waters bring forth if the verb is swarm? You see the idea? It seems kind of simple. Now, Everett Fox and Robert Alter, they tend to do some of the things that I've done, but not nearly as much as I've done. And when I was working on this, Jacob, you know what? I made a decision to never look at Fox or Alter because I knew they were way ahead of me in terms of having started before me. And I didn't want to be influenced by them as far as their choice of words. And I still haven't looked in any detail to see how often they have what I have. But that would be an example. And a living life breather, I like that. What is an animal? A nefesh kaya. It's a living life breather. So we're going to have a living life breather. And then birds are flyers. They fly. So let flyers fly. So maybe it doesn't even just mean birds, maybe just flying things. We need a lot of flying things flying around, as opposed to land things that creep and crawl on the ground. Here's another one, chapter 1, Genesis, verse 11, New RSV. Then God said, let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seed in it. Again, nothing wrong with that. I like it, but I like this better. And Elohim said, I put the names of God in. It's really important sometimes to notice that. If it's Yahweh, if it's Elohim, if it's Eloha, if it's El Shaddai, I don't translate them. I give you in the introduction an understanding of what they mean. But if you're working with sources particularly, you want to know when it's Yahweh, when it's Elohim, when both are used together and so forth. So Elohim said, in Genesis 1, by the way, we'll talk about it in a minute, is Elohim. And Elohim said, but notice Elohim plural, said singular. So Elohim is the force, essentially El is force, Eloah. And so Elohim is the sort of collective, the force of all forces, I like to call it. So the force of all forces said, let the land sprout the sprout. Once again, that's like a swarm the swarm. The verb is sprout a sprout, and a plant seeding seed. Now, some of these would just be, you could say, well, that's very beautiful poetically, but does it really make a difference? Sometimes it might not make a difference. For example, in Hebrew, if you name something, you call to it. So when the God called the light day and the darkness, he called night. I have an Elohim called to the light day. Now, that doesn't even matter, except I like the idea that there's something out there. Remember, Adam names the animals later, and I throw the name at them, almost like, here, your day, your night. You call to them and designate them in that way. It was an evening and a morning, the first day. Well, guess what? It doesn't say the first day. It says day one. Doesn't it have more of a drum beat? Day one. And so why put the first day if it's day one? Here's the nice one. This is 2:24-25, Genesis. Therefore, a man leaves his father and his mother and clings to his wife, and they become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. That'd be an example, not so much of theology, but just theological assumptions. There's no word wife. It's his woman. Ish, man, isha, woman, just like woman in the word man. Therefore, a man will leave his father and his mother and join to his woman, and they become one flesh. And the two of them were nude, the soil man and his woman, and they were not ashamed. And so German is similar to this. There are words for wife in Hebrew. They're not used here. And it's more of a description that you use, the person to whom you're betrothed or something like that, or the mother of your children. But, you know, in German, you can talk about meine Frau, my woman. It's used for a married woman, but still a woman. And also that they were nude on down when the serpent is described. It's really not serpent, it's Nakash, the shining one. It's the same word, nude and shrewd. So I do that play on words. He's shrewd and they're nude, meaning they're slick, they're smooth, they don't have hair, they don't have clothing on them. And also soil man, I really had to work on this. Adam is from Adamah, dirt, red dirt. I could call him red dirt man, but dirt in English means dirt also, whereas soil has a clean aspect, like the ground. But there's another word for ground, Adamah. So Adam is groundling, maybe. I thought of doing that. I just decided to go with soil man. So he's the soil man. It's not even his name. All of these I explain in the introduction. This one's really interesting. You know how women are supposed to be cursed with pain when they bring forth children? Here's the new RSV. To the woman, I will greatly increase your pangs in childbearing. In pain, you will bring forth children. Okay, that sounds like some special curse. But also, as he goes on to talk to Adam, cursed is the ground because of you. In toil you shall eat. Well, the word pain and toil are the same word. You see what I mean by being consistent, being literal?
Yep.
And so what I said, hardship is really what it means. It's going to be tough. Having children, being a mother, raising a family, the typical female role in this culture, it's tough. And going out and tilling that ground is also tough. So toward the woman, he said, notice toward the woman, not just to the woman, making abundant, I will surely make abundant. Notice, I don't say greatly increase. It means to make a lot. So make a lot, I'm going to make a lot. You've got the repetition. Your hardship, in your pregnancy, in hardship you will bring forth sons. And Adam, in hardship, you will till the soil. So you're getting the idea, I think. Let's see. I give a lot of these in the introduction. And you can go on Kindle and look ahead and decide if you want to get this book. Idioms and figures of speech. I've already mentioned some of them. I love this. Adam is told, eating you will surely eat. Not just you will surely eat. Eating you will surely eat. It's a verbal construction in Hebrew. It's a double use of the verb. It shows emphasis, has this oral quality. You know, you picture somebody talking to a kid or something and saying, you know, walking, you will surely walk, or something like that, and so forth. Let's see. Abraham pulls up stakes, walking and pulling up stakes toward the Negev, the desert. He pulls up stakes. He's walking and pulling up stakes. Well, you pull up stakes. I believe the RSV has Jacob went. You know, I think the Hebrew people like the Hebrew. When you get up early in Hebrew, you know what you do? You don't just get up early. Literally, you shoulder up. you shoulder up, because you got to start carrying things and make your journey and so forth. There's a lot of rhythm and cadence, kind of a staccato feeling. I mentioned that before. This time, this one, and so forth. So let me go. I think I'm giving you the idea. By the way, I use the Leningrad Codex, the oldest complete manuscript of the Hebrew Bible. And instead, this is important because you notice this page again. See all those variants at the bottom? Those
Yes.
are variant readings of the first page of Genesis. Other Hebrew manuscripts, the Greek Septuagint, the Dead Sea Scrolls. So I do the same thing that the Leningrad Codex. I give you the text so you always know where you are, but then I footnote differences. Modern translations just go ahead and put them in, and so they reconstruct a text, and there's nothing wrong with that, except that text doesn't actually exist as a text I can hold in my hands. So I like the idea of doing the text, the Leningrad Codex, that I translated this directly from, and then if it varies in one of these other traditions, put it into the notes. This translation has over 1,000 notes. I put them in the back. A lot of people want them at the bottom of the page. If you get the Kindle, though, you can just highlight them and they pop up. But the reason I don't want them at the bottom of the page is it distracts. I don't want you to always be looking down. If you want to study this translation, fine. Put a marker in the back and read slowly and look back and forth, or footnotes. I tell you, every time there's a masculine or a feminine, I tell you any words that are added that are not in the Hebrew, but you really kind of need to add them. Lots of times Hebrew has something understood. I also include what I call these white spaces. You see right here, right there is one of them.
Yep.
I'm going backwards. So right there is one of them. I include those in the translation. No translations do this. Why do I do it? Because these are actually natural pauses that the writers put in. And sometimes a single verse, like you could be in Jeremiah and you have a single verse, is marked off, almost like double underline, notice this. It's really interesting. So I put in the white spaces. Let's see, what else? I'm going to go to Genesis 1, and then we can start talking about this. Genesis 1:1. This is my favorite thing to talk about in the Transparent English Bible. Now, John 3:16, for God so loved the world, and so forth. Best known verse in the Christian New Testament, I think. Best known verse in the Hebrew Bible, I would say, is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, period. Guess what? That's not only wrong, it's extremely misleading, because it sounds like it's a complete sentence. In the beginning, here's what God did. And then people get into all these discussions. Was there nothing? Was there something out of nothing? What was before Genesis 1? On and on and on. And it actually isn't even about that. Let me read you my translation. And by the way, Fox and Alter and others in the JPS, the Jewish Publication Society, I can't remember, I don't have a new RSV handy here, whether they do it or not, but most of them do it in the traditional way. You know why? Because people have to buy these Bibles, and if you make it so different, they're going to be like, my God, the very first verse doesn't even read like I'm used to. I don't want to buy this Bible. Everybody opens it and starts reading, right, before you buy a translation. So here's the way I think it could be translated, or it maybe should be. At the first of Elohim creating the skies and the land was desolate and emptiness, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the spirit of Elohim was hovering over the face of the waters. And Elohim said, let there be light, and there was light. One sentence. So you see the idea? At the first of God creating the heavens and the earth, that was desolation and emptiness. Picture the planet, picture the moon, which you can even see. Picture Mars, the pictures that we've been getting in the last few years. Tohu vabohu in Hebrew, desolation and emptiness. There was no what we would call today DNA engineering. In other words, there wasn't any kind of structure to it. It was just wind swept and water swept, and the seasons and light coming and going. And here you have the beginning of what I would call the ordering of creation. So it's actually in the construct, a construct makes it a kind of a verbal, like a gerund, a temporal gerund, at the first of Elohim creating, meaning I'm telling you what it was like at the first of him creating or bringing forth the heavens, the skies, and the land. And notice it's skies and land. It's not about the creation of the universe. If the Bible elsewhere says that God created the whole universe, that's fine. I'm not sure that it does, but either way, Genesis 1 has that kind of temporal phrase. Now, why would that matter? Because it changes Genesis 1 to be about the ordering of the land and the skies and the water and the dry land and chaos being removed and order setting in with all the life forms and finally human beings that are to dress and keep the earth. And then you go into the Garden of Eden story and so forth. And so just the very first verse gives you pretty much a completely different idea than you would normally have as you talk about Genesis 1. So, you could ask me, how do you translate this? How do you translate that? You could ask me I think we're doing this live. So Jacob is open to questions. So that's pretty much the introduction, Jacob. Words like holy means to separate. So it doesn't have a, kind of religious feel to it. If I set aside something for a special purpose, then it's holy. Rudolf Otto wrote his famous book, The Idea of the Holy, as the numinous, the sort of shivering. But, tithing, for example, in the Hebrew Bible is your holy money. It's not making you shiver. It's not numinous. It's set aside to be special, to be different from the ordinary. So the fundamental meaning of holy is different from the ordinary. You probably in your own life and experience have objects that are holy. For example, I have one right here. I think I can reach it behind my screen. I was talking about this on YouTube not long ago. This is a coin of Nero, 2,000 years old, minted around 65 or 66 CE. And I've had it for years. I work on Paul a lot. And this coin is holy to me. Why is it holy to me? It's special. I had this on my desk all the time I was writing my books on Paul. I would look at it. I would something about the material object touching the past. And I was trying to touch the past with my thoughts and words and historical evidence. So atonement, boy, that sounds really religious. Atonement. I've heard people say that means at one month. No, it doesn't. It's kafar. It means to cover. If you cover something, you've blocked it out. You've gotten rid of it. You've disposed of it. So sins, you atone for sins by covering them, burying them, basically. Let me get a drink. And Jacob, come back and let's talk.
Do you think that the book of Genesis, because there are other scholars that look at that and they say it's a multi-layered document and what they call the documentary hypothesis, like in the J and the P and the E and the D sources. What do you think about that? Do you think Genesis was a compilation when you go through it? Does it read that way to you, or what are your views on that?
The answer is yes. Fundamentally, yes. Those fundamental sources are there. For example, Genesis 1 has a, quote, creation story. I'm going to call it an ordering story. ordering the land and the sea and the skies of this planet. And Genesis 2 and 3 also has humans being made, but it's kind of a doublet story and it's different. And we think that came from two different accounts. And there are many, many examples in the book of Genesis of double accounts like that. The flood is a really good example. If you lay out the accounts in parallel form, you can see that they tell the same story. How many times does Noah go in the ark? How many times does he seal it up, and so forth? And one source has, 7 pairs of animals, and the other just has a pair of each animal, and so forth. And so, yes, to that extent, yes, I think the sources were there behind. But in this translation, I am not particularly interested in that. I think they will show up more in this translation because you're reading it more literally or carefully or accurately. So they'll kind of pop out at you more if certain terms are not used other than in one source. Richard Elliott Friedman, he wrote a wonderful book called Who Wrote the Bible? But I actually like his volume built on that. It's called The Bible, The Sources Revealed. I think I've got a copy right here. I like to pull these things out if I don't have to search for an hour to look for it. Here it is. And this is really a great book because when you open it, it's the entire Torah. It's color-coded with the different sources. And yes, it does hold up pretty well. And he, in the preface, gives a whole list of things, like one of the sources says Mount Sinai, always, and the other source says Mount Horeb, always. One source talks about Passover, the other source says Days of Unleavened Bread. It's the same festival, so forth. But for the translation, because that's what I'm talking about today, I'm accepting it as a unified literary work because people refer to a redactor and editor. But this so-called redactor or editor, that's a German term, this person, he or she, is much more creative in trying to weave together a story that becomes a new story. Let me give you an example. Luke and Matthew use Mark, I believe, and we should do a show on that because I know you've had all points of view on some of your.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I'm utterly convinced that Mark is first. I think you might lean towards another thing, but I'll convince you you're wrong. Haha. But let's go with me there. And so Luke has rewritten Mark, and then Matthew is rewritten Mark with his own material and so forth. But once they rewrite it, it becomes a new thing. And there is I did a program on this with Derek the other day, Derek Lambert, Myth Vision, on how harmonizing the Gospels destroys them. If you put them all together, you lose the sources. So that Mark might have something like, Jesus says to a man who calls him good, "Why do you call me good? There's none good but God." So that's Mark. Matthew says, "Why do you ask me about the good?" Because I believe Matthew he has a problem with Mark saying, "Why do you call me good? Isn't Jesus good?" He's presenting a Jesus who's very full of glory and authority at the end of the book. But if you put those together, you've lost both. So when we put Genesis together, there's a sense in which we lose the sources, but it does come to us, in other words, as a unified source, as a book. And so in my translation, I am not trying to lay out the sources and talk about them. And very seldom do I put that in the notes because it's not that kind of translation. This would be for people who see Genesis as a monumental work of literature. And I would argue the most influential work of literature on the planet. The only rival might be the Gospel of Matthew, which is the favorite gospel for 2,000 years of the church, or maybe the book of Romans for Christianity. But Genesis, people read all kinds of things in the Hebrew Bible. There are 22 books or 27, the way the Christians count them. But, I'm sorry, 66, the way the Christians count them, 27 in the New Testament. But Genesis clearly is the most influential single text, I would say, in the New Testament also, and in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So the idea of translating Genesis as a literary work, I'm sure Shakespeare had sources as well. We know he did, and many of them have been traced. That's a scholarly enterprise that's worth doing. I have nothing against it in any way. In fact, I love to read and learn more about the sources and how they fit together. But also, we've got the whole. If I pick up this book, this is Genesis. And I don't reveal the sources as Friedman does. So our books are about different things. Friedman, by the way, is the entire Torah. So yes, I do think, and I find that very useful. I like to know why things are different in one source and the other. And the best explanation seems to be, Jacob, that they're coming from different periods and regions of Israelite history, usually seen as northern and southern. And I could possibly go with that. But, it's not my field. If I'm wrong on any of this, I plead innocent. It's not my field. My field is early Christianity. So what are you doing translating Genesis, Tabor? I'll tell you, I got so tired in class of going through the entire Bible, Hebrew Bible and New Testament, because I was trained in Hebrew Bible as well. People asked Bart Ehrman recently when he did the Genesis thing, well, you're a New Testament scholar. Why are you doing Genesis? And he points out that he was trained in Hebrew Bible as well. I was too at the University of Chicago. I took major courses in the Hebrew Bible with Alstrom and other major Hebrew Bible scholars. And I learned Hebrew as an undergraduate in college. But it's not my specialty. I moved toward the ancient Mediterranean, the Roman period, ancient Mediterranean religions, New Testament, early Christianity, Dead Sea Scrolls. So that way I get off the hook if I say something wrong. But I'm also very interested in the Hebrew Bible. And I got tired of saying to students, okay, I know in your translation, and we were using the Revised Standard Version during my time teaching. I've retired now. But I would say, well, actually, the Hebrew doesn't say that. And then I'd tell them what the Hebrew really says. And they would often ask me after class, Dr. Tabor, is there a translation that has what the Hebrew says? Because you're always telling us what the Greek says or what the Hebrew really says. Well, is there a translation that has that? And the answer is yes and no, but I kind of want there to be. So I would say yes, on Genesis there is. And I think Fox, Alter, Friedman, and others who have attempted to translate in this way would also contribute to that enterprise. So I hope that helps answer the question.
Are there other examples of the mistranslation of Genesis 1:1 that you were talking about earlier about in the beginning? God created everything. Is there other examples of that in the book of Genesis that you would say has been seriously mistranslated?
Because you're right. I've mentioned idioms and literal allusions to language, like, lifting up your feet and walking and so forth. Let me think. In Genesis, what would be the best example of that? I would say probably some of the Garden of Eden stuff has lent itself to a standard interpretation that the tree of the knowledge of good and bad, as it should be translated, not good and evil. Evil has a it's tov and ra, good and bad. That is, bad is not good, good is not being good, that is being bad. So the tree of good and bad, in that whole narrative about the tree and the tree of life, it's been pictured as the fall of humans, usually called the fall of man. It's part of the catechism of the church. And even within Judaism to some degree, but thankfully to a lesser degree within various forms of Judaism and rabbinic interpretation. But if you look at how that phrase is used elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible, and it's only used one time, it's used for children. This is, let's see, Deuteronomy 1, verse 39, I believe. Check me on that football signal, going by memory here, but I think it's 139. Moses is talking to the Israelites, and he says, your little children who do not yet have the knowledge of good and evil. They don't yet have it. Well, they're going to have it yet later. So are they in the Garden of Eden falling? They're not falling. They're growing up. So the story of Eden is a story very much like Gilgamesh, that if you're going to grow up and become like gods, Elohim, become like Elohim, knowing good and evil, as you're becoming a conscious moral agent with free choice and will, the way they're presented, you can choose what you want to do. Then you get put out of the garden where there's the tree of life. As you had access to the tree of life, but you didn't take it. But if you take of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you lose your innocence. And what do you do right away? You're naked and unashamed, so you put on clothes. If a little kid runs down the street out of the bathtub and is age 3, most of us laugh and we're okay with that. We might help catch the kid if he's running really fast. But if a 16-year-old runs out of the bathtub naked, we call the police. So we kind of recognize the difference. And most religions and traditions of religion recognize this. I remember growing up, Christians would call it the age of accountability. Jews talk about bar and bat mitzvah, being a son or daughter of the commands, meaning that you become a responsible individual to make your own choices. And once you make your own choices and you're a free agent, you're a little God, you're a little Elohim. You're not the force of all forces, but you're a force. And you're out there. And so Cain whacks his brother and strikes him dead and chooses that, whereas others chose to do good things. And so this idea of the fall of humans, it's not so much of a fall or as a reality check. You know, I'm a real fan of Bob Dylan's poetry and his music, and I love his voice, by the way. So if you hate Dylan's voice, sorry about that. I think you probably don't understand that he has about 50 voices and he makes himself sound the way he wants to sound for the song that he's singing. But one of his songs is Outside the Gates of Eden. And he uses that metaphor to be outside the gates of Eden. So when you were born and grew up in your family, and this is assuming a kind of Edenic life, let's hope you had good parents. Many people don't, but you had some measure of peace and security and tranquility. And then you grow up and begin to make your own choices and you leave the house, so to speak. You go out on your own. Prodigal son, right? Remember the New Testament? You can do anything you want. It's very scary. All these shootings make us in our own time realize how scary it is. Anybody can do anything they want to do within their own mental and physical power. Wow, that's a scary world, and it's not the world of Eden. But finally, we all become mature enough to make our choices. And so we're outside the gates of Eden. So I think that's been mistranslated, misunderstood. And if you put all those texts together about your eyes will be open, you will become as gods, knowing good and evil. And I think that's picked up on another subject, Jacob, but Paul, we've talked about it before, Philippians 2, though he's in the form of God, he doesn't count equality with God a thing to be grasped, talking about Jesus. I don't think that means he was in heaven and gave up his divinity. I don't think he had divinity in Paul's view, but he grew up, and rather than like the first Adam, grasped for eternal life, grasped by eating the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Instead, he became a servant. He emptied himself. So that it's a different subject, but it's built off a correct reading, as I would see it, of the Garden of Eden story. And so the Nakash, the snake, literally means the shining one. He's slick, right? He's shrewd, and they're nude. And what he does essentially is test them, kind of like the Satan or the opposer in Job. He basically says, so God said you couldn't eat of any tree? And they go like, oh, well, no, we can eat of any tree except that one tree. Oh, you can't eat of that one. Well, God knows if you eat of that one, your eyes are going to be open and you're going to be like gods, like Elohim, knowing good and evil. And that's exactly how Genesis sees human beings. We are little gods made in the image of the Elohim of Elohim, but we can choose good and evil. And so we can have eternal life. Now, in the New Testament, at the end, remember, the tree of life shows up again. But that has nothing to do with Genesis. And in Genesis, like Gilgamesh, remember, Gilgamesh gets the magic plant that's going to give him eternal life, but he's very tired and human and weak, and he falls asleep, and a snake comes and eats it. It's amazingly parallel, not as the same story, but the same idea that it's not for you. Bob Dylan again, it ain't you, babe. You want to be a god? You want to go to heaven? You want to live forever? You're a human being. Dust you are, and to dust you shall return. So in the Hebrew Bible, all those things are set out in a way that's really different for people. The other one would be humans are made in the image of God, and God breathes into their nostrils the breath of life, and humans or man became a living soul. And so out of that, people get all this anthropology about there's the body and it's of dust, and then the spirit, it's the soul. And actually a complete mistranslation. It means a living breather. A living breather, we just read about the flying things and the insects are living breathers. It means anyone who lives by taking in oxygen. And the breath of life means a living breather who takes in oxygen. That's how it's used in Genesis. It's not talking about any kind of immortal soul or anything like that. Now, how would you have had eternal life? Theoretically, if you had eaten of the tree of life, then you would have been transformed into a non-decaying person, not dust of the earth, but as Paul believes, Jesus was a life-giving spirit. He talks about the first Adam is dust, but the second Adam is spirit. But it's not inherent in the Hebrew Bible. When you go to Sheol, which means, death, the pit, the grave, you're not an immortal soul floating around in Hebrews like in Greek Hades mythology. Hope that throws some light on that. So you got any questions coming in?
Nothing in the super chat so far.
Okay. Maybe I'm so convincing no one has questions, or maybe, I don't know.
So Nahash doesn't mean serpent, it means shining one. Because I've always read.
Well, brass, the word brass is nakash or copper.
Mm-hmm.
When Moses makes that snake, it's called a serpent. It's nakoshet. It's nakash means to shine or be brilliant. Clearly in that story, it's a creature. a shining creature, and since it crawls on its belly and eats dust, it's easy to see how it becomes a snake in later mythology. But the word itself just means a shining creature. I think the emphasis is that he's shrewd, he's slick, he's smooth. You know, like we say, a smooth operator. He's a smooth operator. You better be careful. He's going to fool you. Later in Job, this same opposer, he's the opposer, like the counsel for the prosecution in a law case. He always brings up the other side. Oh, God said this? Well, what about that? You need to think that over. Maybe God is trying to keep something from you. Remember with Job, very similar thing. Yeah, Job's following you, but you give him all this stuff. I bet if you took some of that stuff away, he would curse you. So, bringing up the other side. So we do it all the time in our own conversations with people. We say, well, wait a minute, maybe the poor have not had the opportunity that the wealthy have and not been exposed to some of things, or because of racism or other kind of cultural prejudices or gender prejudices that, there are factors involved and so forth. And so bringing up the other side, it's not an evil thing as much as an alternative. And you find that pretty much throughout the Hebrew Bible. You've done shows on Satan, I bet.
Oh, yes.
All you guys have, and gals out there on YouTube.
When you look at the Leningrad Codex, there are incomplete fragments of the Book of Genesis out there, other ones. Do you know if they read differently than the Book of Genesis and the Leningrad Codex? In terms of redactional, like things put in there that wasn't originally there.
On every page here's a copy of the Leningrad Codex that most of the scholars use. It's been corrected now because there are a few mistakes. You see the bottom there, every page? Yeah. And I just flip it random. Look, there are variant readings in various Hebrew manuscripts, traditions, and so forth. Also Greek and Hebrew in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So if you do, I did a program a couple of years ago, and I was just on a Zoom meeting, just talking. I didn't even intend it to be anything, but it was on the Dead Sea Scroll version of the Bible. Here's the Dead Sea Bible and the Hebrew Bible, and it's in English. And whenever it differs, it has at the bottom, Masoretic text MT, which would be the Leningrad Codex. And if I just open it up, for example, and I didn't even plan to do this, but since you asked, why don't I open it to Genesis 1, and we'll see what some of the differences are. Okay. Genesis 1:5, God called the light daytime. And that is a 4Q Genesis. It's a piece of Genesis found in K4 at Qumran. And also, and that's it. Whereas day, not daytime, is the Septuagint and the Masoretic text in the Samaritan Pentateuch. This is really a nice book because it has the Septuagint and the Samaritan Pentateuch as well. Anytime there's a difference, they put it in italics. So I wouldn't think that's a big difference, daytime, whatever. But sometimes, let me see if I can find one that might be, here's one that's kind of interesting. Genesis 1:14, let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to separate the day from the night, and they were for signs and seasons and days and years. They were. That's the Dead Sea Scroll, 4Q Genesis. But in the Masoretic text, it says, let them be. not they were. That's significant. That's a kind of taking a different stance for narration. However, other copies of Genesis in the Dead Sea Scrolls have it the way the Masoretic text has it. So it's really difficult. Another one I see here: has God said? The Nakash, we were just talking about that. Has God said you can't eat? The Dead Sea Scroll text says, has God really said? Putting a little more emphasis. Usually people gloss over and they go, those aren't significant. There are no significant differences. Well, that's not actually the case. There are significant differences. Take a look at one of the favorite passages of Christians, Isaiah 53, the suffering servant hymn or song in Isaiah 52, what is it, 52:12, I think, or 52:13 through 53:12. And I included in this, and I put in the Dead Sea Scroll readings. And one of the things I'll mention here, from the travail of his soul, he will see, the King James has, and the RSV, he will see from the travail of his soul. No object. What's he going to see? The Dead Sea Scroll version has, and from the travail of his soul, he will see light. Okay. If you die, you're in darkness. And if you see light, you're coming back from the grave. So you can see how they were interpreting that. I'm not sure by what authority they put the word light, but they did. And they were saying, in effect, he's going to draw near to the gates of Sheol, but then he'll see, which is darkness, and then he'll see light. I have an article, What the Bible Says About Death, Afterlife, and the Future, on my website, jamestabor.com. You've got it there by my name. And you can read all about that because I go into that in great detail, what death is in the Hebrew Bible and so forth. When did resurrection come in? How did it come in? And all of that kind of thing.
Well, we have a super chat question from Vesper. Thank you for your super chat. I've seen somewhat, let me reread that. I've seen somewhere that a Jewish mystical reading of Genesis has God creating nature, spirits, or gods like you see in the Greek. Can you speak to this?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a mystical reading. You know, you have the Zohar and Kabbalistic kinds of traditions that people date in various periods, but most of us think they're coming a bit late. But we do know that within Second Temple Judaism, there were these mystical traditions and traits. You got the Midrashim, the interpretations, you got the Targums. And so whenever you get within Jewish learned sources, readings of things like Genesis, you would get these kinds of things interpreted and expanded and so forth. But we'd have to look at maybe a specific text. The versions I know are generally pretty much what we would find in, say, my Transparent English Bible, or the Septuagint, or the Dead Sea Scrolls, or the Samaritan Pentateuch. But sometimes there is a passage, and maybe you're thinking of this passage, Vesper. It's not in Genesis. It's not in Genesis. I'm trying to think. Yeah, when Jacob blesses the tribes, and then Moses later predicts and blesses the tribes, you've got these parallels. And in the Moses account, which is in Deuteronomy, you have the Most High, God, dividing the nations according to the sons of Israel. And in the Dead Sea Scroll version, according to the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God. And so you can see how there's a textual tradition that these Elohim of God, are really, really active in terms of the heavenly chord and so forth. And you get that in other places. Job talks about the sons of God singing at creation and that sort of thing. Michael Heiser's book, The Unseen Realm, goes into this throughout the Hebrew Bible. I would really recommend it highly. If you just want to study the text, whether you agree with his more conservative interpretation or not, he's very good at laying out all the texts. Who are these Elohim? So I certainly it lends itself to that, but just a straight reading of the Hebrew, I don't find it much. The Hebrew Bible is remarkably devoid of demons and spirits and magical thinking along those lines. When you get to the stories of Elijah, you get a lot more of that. Axe heads are floating and people are getting raised from the dead, and a jar of meal replenishes itself every day, so you never run out of food during a famine. But other times, like when Elijah hides in the Wadi Kerith, which is in Transjordan, up north by Beit Shean, it says that ravens brought him food day and night. Now, I think that's pretty amazing. A miracle story. But it's not as though he just looked at the ground and food popped up. It's like ravens brought him food, I guess from the garbage dump of Pella, which was just to the north. Anyway, so good question. Genesis has lent itself to lots of mystical interpretations. You could imagine why.
What other mistranslations would you consider to be there in the book of Genesis and other Bibles? Would you consider to be serious mistranslations like the ones you just talked about?
Throughout the whole Hebrew Bible?
No, in the book of Genesis.
In the book of Genesis. I didn't really make a list, or I think other than those beginning things in the Garden of Eden and so forth, there are little things along the way that I think are significant, like the idea that, remember Rachel and Leah, that Rachel's beautiful and Leah is, kind of plain or something like that. That doesn't hold up in the Hebrew. It actually, her eyes are tender or soft. And so you get little clarifications like that. I don't know if it's major in that sense, but I would encourage people not to just worry about those kind of things. You're going to come across them. Maybe I'm just not thinking of some of them, like the Binding of Isaac's story. I think there's some things there. But I want you to get the literary feel of this work of literature, the power of it, as you would read it in a more original form. I had a quotation here. You know how you put in the front of your book all these wonderful things people have said about your translation? There's one here I'll read you, not only because the guy loved it, but if I can find it. I shuffle my book around here. I'll just do it this way. Why am I shuffling pages? I happen to own the book. This was a mother with her children. I'm just enthralled at how beautiful the wording is and excited to read it aloud to the children, especially. Talk about a fascinating story. It reminds me of a play being read. I can imagine someone like Mark Twain doing a reading with such life and beauty and meaning. It makes you feel like you're there. It makes me stand up and move around and use body language because I can believe the whole scene. And that was just, an average person. This is a linguistics scholar, professor of linguistics. He got his degree from uh, University of Texas, Austin. I've worked in linguistics for 25 years now, and I've been a lay reader of the Bible, doesn't claim to be a scholar. Reading the new translation of Genesis is at once familiar, but also like reading something I've not read before. There's an ancient, mysterious quality about it that makes me want to, like Moses, take off my shoes while standing on holy ground. There's a feeling that I've discovered something that's been hidden for the ages. So, somebody wrote on my comments on YouTube recently, like, "Oh, Tabor, you just want to sell your books." Yeah, I want to sell this book. I'd give it to you if you come knock on my door, I guess. But my point is, I want you to have the experience of reading this book in the way that someone who reads it in Hebrew uh, does read it. You know how if you've learned a foreign language, you know this. Lots of times you can't. The language, the foreign language, or your native or indigenous language has a feel to it, your mother tongue, and you can't really translate it as much as try to explain it more. And that's what I try to do for readers of Genesis to get the feel of it. Okay.
If you were to translate other books in the Old Testament in the Hebrew Bible, would you do it in a similar way? Also, I know that there are manuscript variations of books like Deuteronomy, for example, especially in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Would you use older manuscripts to use older
Well,
versions of those verses?
if
Or different?
I think I would need to stick with my method, and my method is to have a control text from which you can compare then and contrast the differences. If I start putting Dead Sea Scroll readings into the text, then I've created another text that doesn't really exist. It might be more original by my judgment. And this is what all modern translations do for the most part. The Jewish JPS, the Tanakh, the Jewish Publication Society Hebrew Bible, tries to stay pretty much with the Masoretic text and footnote the differences. But other modern translations, RSV, ESV, NIV, New English Bible, all of them, they make what's called an eclectic text. They put in the readings that scholars judge to be most authentic. Same with the New Testament. I decided not to do that because I didn't want to make those judgments rule the text. I'd rather have a standard text, which is the oldest one we have, Leningrad Codex, and then note the differences. So yes, Deuteronomy, I would have all the differences, and they would be in notes, in footnotes, and the same with some of the other books. Whether I'll do it all, I don't know. I would like to finish the Torah, and we've got a good chance of doing that over the next 3 or 4 years. I just don't know. I like what I'd really like to do. Mark, because people say it's bad Greek, and they make all these comments about it, and I want to do something different with it. By the way, Jacob, I don't mind recommending other people's works. Do you know this gentleman? I think he's at Notre Dame, David
That book
Bendick.
looks familiar to me.
Yeah. This is his translation. It's just wonderful. He really tries to get to the Koine Greek and the feel of it. and I would really recommend it. The New Testament is done by so many people. I don't know. Would I really be contributing that much? I also have this. This is out of print now. No, actually, I think you can get one still. This is my favorite. You know, Hugh Schoenfield, who wrote the Passover plot.
Oh yeah, I know who that is.
Yeah, everybody knows him. He translated the New Testament. Hugh Schoenfield, the authentic New Testament. And he does a couple things really interesting. First of all, he puts the books in somewhat of a chronological order. So he puts Mark first because he thinks Mark wrote first and so forth. But it really has the flavor of Koine Greek. And Bentley Hart, David's book as well, has that feeling. I think authentic New Testament you can still get, but not in this nice, beautiful edition, which I got used. But
I just looked it up on Amazon. I think I found it, and it's
good. Yeah, I'm glad it's still out there. It's important to have the feel of a culture. And when I'm reading Schoenfield or when I'm reading Hart, I majored in Greek in college, so Greek is my best foreign language, and I've had classical Greek and Koine Greek, and I've read the New Testament in Greek, you know, dozens and dozens of times. So my Greek's pretty good, and it's not as good as I would like it to be. I can't sight read Homer, but I had graduate courses in Homer and had to read quite a bit of it. But you know, it's not like I'm completely fluent in Greek, but I know enough to know the feel and rhythm of Greek. And both of these books I would really recommend, Hart and Schoenfield. I think he pronounced his name Schoenfield. I corresponded with him in his later years. He was living in England, and I was a grad student at the University of Chicago, because I heard a story from him that I'll pass on to you that's kind of intriguing. He had been told by a traveler that when the Turks ran the Armenians out of Turkey and created what we call the Armenian Holocaust before World War I, it was a horrible period of time. A lot of their literature ended up in Syria and in Iraq. And Schoenfield had heard from a traveler who was a Syrian, I believe, that in the Syrian monastery in Baghdad, that I think is still intact even after the wars, there is a collection of the sayings of Jesus that's, he said as a kid, I believe he was Armenian and maybe a Syrian citizen, but Armenian by his religion. The Armenian church is the oldest church in Jerusalem, meaning Armenian Christian church. But he said we would read from this book of the sayings of Jesus, but it was a manuscript, a book. And Schoenfield wondered if that could have been some version of something like Q, or if not Q, just a collection of the sayings of Jesus. It definitely wasn't Thomas, because Thomas had been found in 1945. And so I wrote him about that, because I had heard a similar story, completely unconnected, by an elderly man in Chicago that was from the Armenian tradition, that heard me speak and said, oh yeah, we had this book of the sayings of Jesus, not a printed book, but a handwritten book that was very precious to us, and we would read from it. So I've asked a couple of Armenian scholars like Michael Stone, and he's retired from Hebrew University, and he's not aware of any such thing in the Armenian libraries. But so I corresponded with him a little bit, and I enjoyed that as I was a young guy in my 20s, and here I'm writing Hugh Schoenfield. So he's known for the Passover plot. But his best book, in my opinion, is Those Incredible Christians. I don't have a copy right here, but you can definitely get it from Amazon. Those Incredible Christians. I think it's the best book on early Christianity ever written. I know that sounds extravagant since I write books on early Christianity. I just love it. And in the back, he has an appendix, the Christology of Paul and the Christology of John. And it's just such an interesting book. And I love the title too. So,
has anyone attempted to search that monastery to find out if that document is
yes,
really there?
yes. In fact, here's a story for you. The Adventures of James Tabor. I've been 70 times to the Holy Land since 1990. So right before the first Gulf War, I had a driver in Jerusalem, a Palestinian Arab driver that I used to go everywhere. He took me to the Gaza Strip. He took me to Egypt. He took me to Jordan, anywhere I wanted to go. And he mentioned to me that he and his family go shopping in Baghdad once a month because things are cheaper. This is before the war, under Saddam Hussein. And I thought, you can go to Baghdad? Like, you can drive? And he goes, yes, James, we drive. He gets in the family car and the whole family goes to Baghdad from Jordan. It's a long haul. You can look at a map and see you got to go way across the desert, but there's a highway. And I said, would you take me? And he said, of course. I would take you. I said, well, I want to bring a couple of scholars with me because we want to go to the Syrian monastery in Baghdad and check this out. And so I hope my wife doesn't hear this, but I've told her. I didn't tell her that I had these plans, and I was going to do it. And then when I got back safely, tell her, oh, by the way, I went to Baghdad. Just because I think she would worry. And why would she worry? It was before the first Gulf War. So this was like the late, the first Gulf War was what, 90, 91? So this was like probably 89. And there was a little bit of tension with Saddam and so forth, but the war hadn't started yet. And I just felt like if I told her, she would, forbid me to go, and it'd be better just to go. But what happened was the war broke out and we never went. And so, and since then, I've never been back. I've never felt that I could go back because of all the tensions. There were terrible bombings just recently and shootings. So is it, I have checked with people that have been, and James Charlesworth wants to go with me. I got a couple of other Armenian people fluent in Armenian and Syriac. This would be in Syriac, from what I understand. So maybe I'll be able to do that in the next 4 or 5 years. Who knows?
I just find it interesting that you were told that there's 2 independent sources saying that there's some kind of Q-looking document inside that monastery, and so I kind of find it hard, and the implications about the other scholar you were talking about.
I got to clear my throat. I'm going to mute for.
And you said he had contact with this other scholar that doesn't know anything about it. At the same time, it's like, do you think it's really there?
What I've heard is people who've been to Baghdad have told me that I'm real interested in the Mandeans, and they're in Iran and Iraq, and I put things up on my YouTube channel about the Mandeans, Mandean baptism, and James McGrath has worked on this a lot, and Charles Hawke and others. No, I said his name, not Charles Hawke, sorry. Since this is live, Charles Hawk is another guy that works on Gnostic stuff, but Charles Haberl and James McGrath, the Mandean Book of John. Sorry, Charles, because Charles and I are friends, and in my old age here, I get mixed up on names. But I've been told by people that have been to Baghdad that monastery and library that came from Armenia, the Syrian Christian library there, is intact. It wasn't bombed or looted or destroyed. So that gives me hope. But I probably shouldn't talk about this publicly because somebody's going to go do it. But I don't really care if somebody finds it. They find it. I don't need the glory. I just need the text.
It would be
amazing. It would be amazing. Yeah.
So
look at the Gospel of Thomas, how amazing that was. A collection of the sayings of Jesus. Wow. It's
to me when after you told me about that, I felt like it feels like it's there. It kind of does. It's kind of, because it'd be kind of a strange thing to make up.
Yeah, it was two independent sources.
And,
that's why I wrote Dr. Schoenfield and said, and a friend of mine, I won't say his name, and because I don't have permission to use his name, but he's a scholar. He has a PhD. He went to see Schoenfield on not his deathbed, but pretty shortly before he died, and went over this story again with him and got more details. So we actually have more details now. And he has shared that with me, because all I did with Schoenfield was just do a couple of letters back and forth, which I have. So Jacob, you want to go? You up for traveling?
Yeah, I would like to. I
We
certainly
should
would
get
like to.
you and Derek and Neil, the three horsemen, and me, and head on over there. And then you could all
That would be
do
great.
live YouTubes from Baghdad. So,
And that's going to be, and you plan to do that in 4 to 5 years?
I don't know. I just don't know.
Okay.
It is dangerous. Oh, I know. I
I
forgot
can
to
imagine.
tell you. I lost my train of thought. My wife would be worried, but another thing the driver told me, I've seen this driver over the years, and I haven't been to Israel because of COVID in 3 years, but or since 2020, so it'll be coming up 3 years. He said, "Now, James, when I take you, we will get robbed 2 or 3 times." I said, "What?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, when my family and I go, you get robbed. You like there's something in the road and you have to stop, and then guys come out of ditches and they rob you, and then they let you go on." He said, "Think of it as a toll on the highway." And I said, "Well, how will I mean, I don't want to bring a credit card or anything like that." He goes, "No. You bring $200 or $300 cash, stash it in various parts of the car, and when you're robbed the first time, $100. Oh, I don't have that much on me, but here's $100. Put it in 20s where it seems like."
Wow.
I don't know if he was just kidding, but if I'd told my wife that, yeah, I'm going to Baghdad, we think it's safe, and we're going to get robbed 2 or 3 times. It's sort of like a toll, don't worry. Well, her attitude would be like, yeah, it might be a toll for him, but you're a Westerner. For you, it could be a kidnapping ransom opportunity because you're an American citizen. How stupid are you, James? And she probably would have been right. So I think it's good that I didn't go. Things were really tense then.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining me again, Dr. Tabor.
Yeah, I hope people, we didn't get a lot of questions, but maybe we stunned everybody, and
Yeah.
the book's on sale right now. It's cheaper than usual. I reduced the price. I've been talking about it, and I hope that people will get it and enjoy it. and it has its scholarly aspects, but really I did it more for the richness of the literature itself.
Well, thanks for joining me again.
Okay, take care.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during a live stream. Thank you.